Tonight, protest politics. President Trump is raising the cry for law and order.
And what's he doing? He just kept pouring gasoline on the fire.
As his Democratic challenger points to the president as the root of the division. And
we still have tremendous challenges from COVID.
Even with thousands without power, water, or transportation in the wake of Hurricane Laura, there's a coronavirus wrinkle. And with a vaccine on the horizon,
that is shocking and despicable.
The fear over making vaccinations mandatory. Plus,
so I do personally think chokeholds should be outlawed.
Putting deadly police tactics under the microscope. All this and more tonight on Faith Nation. And welcome to Faith Nation. I'm Ben Kennedy. President Donald Trump is planning to visit Kenosha, Wisconsin tomorrow after more than a week of protests following the shooting death of Jacob Blake. CBN News correspondent Mark Martin joins us with the details. Hi, Mark.
Hey, Ben. President Trump will be meeting with law enforcement and assessing the damage, but it's unclear if he will meet with the family of Jacob Blake. In this video, a police officer is seen shooting Blake in the back 7 times after Blake attempted to reach into his van. More than a week of unrest and protests followed. The officer, Rustin Shesky, and 2 others have been placed on modified leave. There's also been a public outcry over 17-year-old Kyle Rittenhouse, who is charged with shooting 3 people and killing 2 in Kenosha during protests last week. Trump says officials are looking into whether Rittenhouse may have been within his rights to protect himself. Meanwhile, White House Press Secretary Kayleigh McEnany weighed in on behalf of the president on the violence and protests.
The president shows up. When the Trump administration arrives in a Democrat-run city engulfed in chaos, peace is restored, law and order is upheld.
Turning now to Portland, where continued rioting there became deadly over the weekend. There were 2 gun blasts late Saturday night downtown, followed by this video of someone running away. The dead man, identified as Aaron J. Danielson, also known as Jay Bishop, was said to be part of the right-wing group Patriot Prayer. President Trump tweeted this about Saturday's violence, saying Portland Mayor Ted Wheeler is incompetent, much like sleepy Joe Biden. This is not what our great country wants. They want safety and security and do not want to defund our police. Today in Pittsburgh, Biden fired back, blaming President Trump, that is, as the root of violent protests across the country.
Fires are burning, and we have a president who fans the flames rather than fighting the flames.
In his prepared remarks, he also said President Trump long ago forfeited any moral leadership and said the president cannot put an end to the violence because for years he has instigated it. Ben, back to you.
Now is veteran journalist Ray Suarez. Ray, thanks for being with us. Today, Biden, who rarely leaves Delaware since the pandemic, traveled to Pittsburgh for a bit of a campaign speech. He addressed the issue of violence in the streets, condemning looting and riots. Are these kind of trips critical for the former VP since they, quite frankly, don't happen often?
Well, sure, he has to be seen out there, but he can't be seen as responding directly to the president's taunts. Mr. Trump has been saying, Joe's in his basement, he's low energy, he's sleepy, he can't get out. So when you get out, you have to show that you're out there among the people, but not in a way that says, it's gotten under my skin that the president is saying I don't go anywhere, so here I am. It's important, especially as we enter the last 60-plus days of campaigning, that Joe Biden be seen in the rest of the country.
Ray, President Trump and Portland's mayor traded jabs over the weekend on who is responsible for the spike in violence in that city. Today, Biden said Trump is fanning the flames. Does this kind of rhetoric help the situation on the ground?
Well, for days now, for several days, right-wing coordinated messaging has come out saying that Joe Biden won't condemn the violence, that he's had nothing to say about the violence in Kenosha and Portland, when in fact, on several occasions, he has had something to say. So on a day when the president's press secretary, Kayleigh McEnany, refuses to put the president on the record against the kind of violence that happened against protesters in Kenosha at the hands of an armed teenager. At the same time, when the president is tweeting video of an attacker on a subway platform in New York throwing a woman up against a subway car, on the same couple of days when the president is tweeting out video of self-styled militiamen rolling in convoys of trucks into Portland to confront protesters and calling them patriots, this provided an opening for Joe Biden to come in and say, I condemn the violence, stop saying I don't. And it was not a good day for the president because on the very same day, his press secretary said the president won't be getting into that.
Yeah, I heard her talk about that today in the briefing. Looking ahead, we are seeing diminished fields of undecided voters for 2020. What does this mean for Trump or for Biden?
This is not a dynamic race, really, and it's a fight over a diminishing number of voters. The president, throughout his presidency, one of the most remarkable things about his polling numbers, his approval, his disapproval, his right track, wrong track, is just how stable they've been, almost isolated from what's happening in the presidency, whether he's having a good week or a bad week. His ratings don't go up or down very much. Similarly, the people who say they want the president to leave office have stayed about where they are. So right now, they're going to fight over a very small number of undecideds between now and Election Day. And of course, it only made sense for the president to try to say to those few undecideds remaining, not only to keep the ones that are already on his side, but to say to the remaining undecideds, here, look, you're still making up your mind. This is what's coming if you vote for my opponent. This is what America will be like next year. Today in Pittsburgh, Biden took the opportunity to say, no, this is what America is like today while you are president.
The Democrat and Republican national conventions are over this week. Are we seeing any kind of post-convention bounce or even no bounce at all from the past 2 weeks?
I think what we saw in the two conventions is the themes that are going to carry us over the next 9 weeks being put into motion. Not much in the way of bounce. Audiences will never again meet the kind of high watermarks that we saw for political conventions in the 1980s and early 90s. America just isn't like that anymore, and people don't consume media in that same way anymore. So the bounces are more likely to be seen over time and be more muted. But what we got to look at was both parties' playbooks going forward.
Ray Suarez, thanks for your insight. Appreciate it.
Good to see you.
Thousands in Louisiana are still without power, water, or even transportation. And like everything else this year, response has been affected by the COVID crisis.
Being a good neighbor means doing all the things you would normally do during a storm, just doing it from 6 feet away and with a mask on. Because we still are the state in the country with the most cases per capita. We still have tremendous challenges from COVID.
And the governor is receiving some criticism from residents about putting too much emphasis on the virus threat, which they say pales in comparison to the danger from this storm. Residents aren't sure what will happen to them. CBN's Operation Blessing scrambled to deliver aid until they could safely be evacuated. To give to Operation Blessing's Disaster Relief Fund, call 1-800-700-7000. You can also visit ob.org. And coming up, with a coronavirus vaccine in the works, the fear of mandatory vaccinations is mounting. That's after this.
Life is better with a good night's sleep. Get your free DVD or booklet of Protect Your Sleep. as the world watches from the outside.
It's a big diplomatic tug of war here in the Middle East.
Go inside the story with Jerusalem Dateline.
Israeli archaeologists are talking about a discovery that could change the thinking about the Temple Mount.
Join CBN Jerusalem Bureau Chief Chris Mitchell and get the biblical perspective on the events shaping the world.
It's what starts in Israel, then ends up going to other places.
Watch Jerusalem Dateline, Friday night at 9:30 on the CBN News Channel.
Life. It's meant to be lived fully. Jesus said it. I came to give you life. Life to the fullest. Life in your family. Life in your finances. Life in your body, mind, and spirit. Life in your everyday. At CBN.com, we're taking what Jesus said seriously. We're here to help you discover life. Life. Live it fully. CBN.com.
President Trump has promised a vaccine to fight the coronavirus by year's end. Recent polls, that is, show, however, up to 35% of Americans say they will not get it. In that case, could government leaders make it mandatory? Paul Strand looks at the complications and even concerns of such a potential decision.
The Supreme Court ruled in 1905, after a smallpox epidemic had raged through Massachusetts, that a state could mandate vaccinations. First Liberty Institute attorney Jeremy Dice.
The court said, look, there is a necessary police power to encourage people to be able to have a vaccine to eradicate this deadly disease, especially amongst children.
The military has long mandated U.S. troops get vaccinations. Many hospitals and schools insist on them. So no surprise, some are now advocating mandatory vaccinations for COVID-19, like Virginia's health commissioner, who said if we develop a vaccine that can prevent it from spreading in the community, we will save hundreds and hundreds of lives. When asked if he would mandate a vaccine, Dr. Oliver replied yes. That's not a popular view, though, among people who may not trust the science or have religious objections.
I think there are people who absolutely, their faith would say, if this vaccine, for example, uses aborted unborn children, fetal tissue, that we're going to take a pass, that we're going to say we can't be a part of anything that would in any way denigrate the value of human life.
But some lawmakers object to allowing any religious exemption, like Virginia Delegate Mark Levine, who proclaimed, "You do not have the right to kill somebody else." If such non-vaccinated then got the virus.
He went on to basically say, I think they should receive criminal penalties.
Levine even compared such people to those who drive drunk.
That is shocking and despicable.
But might it not be a person's duty to get the vaccination to protect those around them, to be their brother's keeper?
No question, we are called to love our neighbor, and we need to be very faithful to do that.
Everyday individual Americans have to recognize that they've got a responsibility, one towards another and to their fellow man and their neighbor, to make sure that they're caring not only for themselves, but for the whole as well.
Cobb points out, though, some people fear the health effects of a new vaccine, particularly on their kids.
We need to very carefully balance personal responsibility, individual liberty, and most importantly, parental rights to do what's best for the children that God has bestowed upon us to raise, not the government.
With a vaccine hoped for soon, this could soon become a prominent national issue. Paul Strand, CBN News, Washington.
Thank you, Paul. And here with us now is our CBN News medical reporter, Lori Johnson. Lori, thanks for being here with us.
Thanks for having me.
Paul just did a long piece about this, but do people have a reason to fear the first iteration of any potential vaccine for COVID-19?
Well, you know, if people can have their own individual feelings, and if people want to be afraid, that's up to them. Right now, the science looks excellent for about 5 vaccines that are currently in phase 3 trials. That means in each one of the trials, 30,000 people are getting the vaccine. They've already been proven, these 5 vaccines, to be safe and effective in smaller groups. So we really just need to wait and find out how these phase 3 trials go. That the National Institutes of Health will be very forthcoming and very transparent with the data. And so we'll have to wait and see how these trials go before we make any decision about their effectiveness and their safety.
Now, Lori, could you see a scenario in which vaccines could possibly be mandatory?
That's really quite a stretch. Paul mentioned in his piece the only time that's really ever been done was in 1905 in the city of Cambridge, Massachusetts, for the smallpox vaccine. Really, a lot of legal scholars say the 14th Amendment does prevent against something like that. And in the case of the Cambridge, though, it was upheld, and the Supreme Court said it was legal to require residents to be vaccinated. But those who weren't vaccinated were just given a simple fine. At the time, it was $5, which translates into about $150 in today's time. So if by some stretch of the imagination we were all required to get vaccinated, perhaps it would only be a small fine. But it's really hard to imagine that. A lot of people do want it, about 2/3 of the population. There's every reason to believe that those people who are hanging back might wait and see for a while how others do. If 2/3 of the population gets vaccinated, that might be enough for herd immunity. We know that there are people who are definitely going to be required to get vaccines. This has been going on for decades. We're talking about school children, people who work in hospitals, people who work in nursing homes, if you're going on a missions trip, if you're going to summer camps. But in all of these instances, you don't have to take part. In fact, if you don't want your children to be vaccinated and school districts require it, which most school districts do, parents can homeschool their children. And we know that homeschooling is very popular, and many parents do it. Their number one reason is because they don't want to have their children vaccinated. So if you're really against vaccination, you're probably going to be okay. You don't need to be worrying about somebody coming to your door and forcing a needle into you or your children's arms.
Yeah, Lori, my wife is actually a pharmacist, and they're preparing for this vaccine, which brings my next question, where are we in terms of developing a vaccine right now?
Well, as I said, the final phase 3 trials are going on right now. Tens of thousands of Americans are being tested all over the country. And so it looks like we should have the results of these phase 3 trials by the fall. And, you know, people are saying October, November, December. And that's when people might start, the general public might be able to start getting vaccinated. And there's a committee that has been developed to determine who gets the vaccine first. Obviously, it'll be the people who are at greatest need, who are at greatest risk for having complications from COVID-19, Ben.
Lori, real quick, the CDC has updated the death toll numbers for those who have died from COVID-19. Does this actually change anything in terms of what we know about the virus?
Not really. It just basically said, Ben, that 96% of people who have died from COVID-19 had what we call these underlying causes, these comorbidities. And only about 6% of all the people who died from COVID didn't have any other comorbidity. And this is something that we've known for a long time, that people with diabetes and heart issues and so forth, these people are at the greatest risk. So that's just motivation for us to try to stay as healthy as we possibly can.
Sounds good. Thank you, Lori.
My pleasure.
And when we come back, in the wake of a nationwide protest putting deadly law enforcement tactics under the microscope. After this.
On October 1st, 1961, history was made when a tiny station began transmitting the first signals of the Christian Broadcasting Network.
CBN, the Christian Broadcasting Network.
And now, a new era has begun with the all-new CBN News Channel.
Just moments ago, the Iron Dome intercepted an incoming rocket right on the Gaza border.
Administering in this area, spiritual warfare is definitely involved.
A 24/7 news network, bringing you the news you want from a source you can trust.
In Kenya, 40% of the medical services are actually provided by these Christian hospitals.
Let's talk about the economy.
Believers here are joining together to win people to Jesus Christ.
All your favorite shows now in one place. Go to cbnnewschannel.com to find out how to get the CBN News Channel on your TV all day, every day. CBN News. Life is better with a good night's sleep. Get your free DVD or booklet of Protect Your Sleep today.
Life. It's meant to be lived fully. Jesus said it. I came to give you life. Life to the fullest. Life in your family. Life in your finances. Life in your body, mind, and spirit. Life in your everyday. At CBN.com, we're taking what Jesus said seriously. We're here to help you discover life. Life. Live it fully. CBN.com.
Defunding the police. This issue has dominated the headlines during the racial unrest underway in America. It's also diverted attention away from the deadly law enforcement tactics that should be eliminated altogether. CBN National Security Correspondent Eric Phillips has the story.
We know it's important for law enforcement to have an advantage when it comes to fighting crime. As recent events prove, however, some practices are questionable at best, illegal, and potentially deadly at worst.
I call everybody my baby. You're like my son. And that's how, the only way that I can look at the community, as if they are blood related to me. And so that means that they trust me. So they trust me to hear what it is that they're saying.
Officer Carol Adams has been patrolling the streets of Richmond, Virginia for more than 20 years. She was personally and professionally horrified by the George Floyd killing.
Me as a mother, yes, outraged at what I saw. And, and we're really, really frustrated because we work really, really hard to build relationships with our community. And all it takes is one incident like that and so many others for everybody to lump us together.
It began with the video, difficult to watch, yet unforgettable once seen.
Mama! Mama!
A police tactical hold, legal at the time in Minneapolis, that led to George Floyd's death.
Putting his knee on his neck and sitting there in a relatively calm position tells you he should have gotten off of it.
Mike Jones is a retired police chief and law enforcement consultant with more than 40 years experience. He believes the arresting officer reaches a point of caretaker rather than enforcer.
And the minute a person is handcuffed, he becomes your personal responsibility as a police officer. You have to take care of that person.
The same pictures and chilling words had happened 6 years earlier as police held a black man in a chokehold. Eric Garner was arrested in New York City for illegally selling cigarettes, and he died after officers used the tactic already banned by their department. Reverend Markel Hutchins is a community activist based in Atlanta, Georgia.
So I do personally think chokeholds should be outlawed, and we should never again in America see a law enforcement professional put their knee on anyone's neck.
Another controversial tactic facing backlash, no-knock warrants. We've seen how they can go wrong, especially in Louisville, Kentucky, when police kicked in the door of Breonna Taylor's apartment, believing it was an illegal break-in because of no verbal identification from officers. Taylor's boyfriend fired his legally registered gun. Police responded with 20 rounds, killing 26-year-old Taylor. In 2006, Atlanta police rushed into the house of 92-year-old Katherine Johnston and shot her to death after she also fired her legally registered gun in fear. Turns out, police had the wrong house.
What ultimately killed Katherine Johnston was the lie that was told to obtain the no-knock warrant. So I think the key is making sure that there are legislative parameters and real restrictions and requirements placed on their usage.
Adams believes a big part of the answer lies in national standards like those recommended by the president's task force on 21st century policing, created after the police shooting of Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri. The 2014 report focused on areas such as building trust and legitimacy, policy and oversight, community policing, training and education, and officers' wellness and safety.
So now it's time to make it something that everyone has to buy into, and every department should be regulated.
She admits, however, regulating policy is one thing, regulating the heart is another.
If an officer really sees both consciously and subconsciously the humanity in the person that they're policing, they simply wouldn't be able to put them in a chokehold. It's also going to take an investment in the type of person that
we bring into police work.
Dr. Patrick Oliver agrees. He is the director of the Criminal Justice Program at Cedarville University, a Christian college in Ohio. He says officers must be selected carefully.
And this job is only for people who are honorable men that love truth, who will judge rightly, and who will do what is right.
Those I spoke to say better training and more checks and balances will help lessen these deadly incidents that we've seen. They also say the standard has to be set and enforced from the top down. Eric Phillips, CBN News.
Thank you, Eric. Coming up, an icon of strength on and off the screen. Chadwick Boseman's faith carried him on. That story is next.
Life is better with a good night's sleep. Get your free DVD or booklet of Protect Your Sleep today.
I'm Ephraim Graham, and this is Studio 5. Cruise with me as I discover the good things happening in the world of music, sports, television, and movies.
The fact that Ryan Coogler was going to be directing the film, I knew that something special was going to happen.
We'll chat with artists at the forefront of entertainment and explore the connection between popular culture and faith.
I asked my pastor, I said, well, does that mean I'm supposed to be a preacher? He says, well, no, you already have a pulpit.
Watch Studio 5 Wednesday night at 9:30.
Remember for a moment what it was like to be a child. You believed every story you were told. You saw a world full of endless possibilities. What stories will the world's orphaned and at-risk children believe? We believe the Bible tells the only story truly worth believing. We believe that every child should have the opportunity to dream, the chance to take challenges and turn them into possibilities, the chance to stand on the promises of God, to recognize their place in the greatest story ever told. They have their whole lives ahead of them. Theirs is a world of endless possibilities. They are looking for a story to believe. We will tell them that story. Will you join us?
And finally tonight, we remember him as the man who portrayed James Brown, Jackie Robinson, and Black Panther, but turns out the star was fighting his own battle behind the scenes. Chadwick Boseman passed away from stage 4 colon cancer on Friday at 43 years old. But he never let difficulty stand in the way of God's plan for his life. Take a listen.
When God has something for you, it doesn't matter who stands against it.
And in a commencement speech at Boseman's alma mater, Howard University, he encouraged graduates to embrace difficulty and trust the Lord's guidance. Boseman touched the lives of many throughout his powerful acting career, but the legacy left of faith and perseverance will touch the hearts for decades to come. And that's going to do it for Faith Nation tonight. We'll see you tomorrow.